So, that wintry time of year between Christmas and New Year, the time when the Green Knight strode into King Arthur's court. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, an English poem written in about the 14th century. We know nothing about the author. It seems to just arrive fully formed, but many of the elements in it have echoes of earlier Celtic folklore from Welsh and Irish mythology. Many threads come together in this. In fact, this story, which on its outset has very chivalric, courtly, romantic, Christian themes that were very popular in the Middle Ages, but scratch the surface just a little and pagan gods are stalking through this story. Great, shaggy, very ancient ideas, primordial beings emerge, as you will see. Just as a little taster, Gawain himself, in the Welsh literature, he's called Gwelach Mai, which means the hawk of May. So something shapeshifty and shamanic, almost like a solar deity in this story, tracking its way through in a way that almost seems invisible to the actual Christian author of this poem. It's like some old magic moving through his quill. I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. You can always skip to it if you want, but I don't want to speak too much about symbolism and meaning in this story because I think it'll unpack itself to you anyway. So Gawain and the Green Knight. It was in the middle of the Feast of Yule, the Christmas celebrations in Camelot, and there had been a lot of mead and good time and good company, a whole array of meats. Everyone's feeling a little bit from the rich food. I'm sure you know the feeling at this time of year. So it was the day just before New Year's Day, and all the feasts were laid out on the table. And I don't know, maybe they're just about to play a nice game of charades or articulate or something. Guinevere was giggling. King Arthur, the great bear himself, was sat at the midst of the celebrations at the round table when suddenly there's a knock at the door of the great hall. Boom! And another. Boom! Even louder, the hall falls hushed. And then finally, the whole door bursts open as a great axe comes straight through it, and through that doorway amid the splinters of wood rides a huge horse, and on top of that horse a great half giant of a man, his head almost touching the very apex of that vast door to Camelot. And he strides in, this emissary from another world. Thing about this guy, he's green. Yep, it's the Green Knight. His hair matted and long and tangled all over his shoulders is green. His great helm is a sort of tarnished coppery green. His ancient armour is green. Even his tunic, the girdle on his horse is green. The horse itself, its fur is green. And even his skin is a pale, sickly green, like the colour of a corpse. Ivy grows in his beard and also grows through the door he's just come in and begins to creep up the columns of the great wall, even up the legs of some of the knights, as that emissary, that great god of the ancient times, the Green Knight himself, looks around at the assembled, shocked knights of the round table, and there's something in his eyes, something ancient in those deep black eyes, something from the very heart of the forest, from some cave deep at the dawn of time, something living and dying and being reborn. In fact, the whole room of the great hall seems to shift and breathe as if someone had put some sort of mushroom in the mead. Surely it was a primordial deity that stood before them, some half-giant of some half-forgotten time. This figure held in one hand a great green battle axe, ancient weapon, and in the other a bough of holly. Red and green, ancient symbol of peace for this Yuletide time of year. And the Green Knight spoke. He spoke like, his voice was like, I don't know, a stream on some high moor, or like some rumbling weather front rolling in. Ha, 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 ho, 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 he said. I've heard much about you, Knights of the Round Table. I come in peace, but also bring a challenge. And threw down that holly branch right into the centre. The knights' hands went to their swords. What was this? A challenger. A game, said the Green Knight. See if you are quite so mighty as the tales told of you, said the Green Man. And he said, I will bare my neck here in the middle of this court. One of you will take my axe and you will land a blow, the best blow you can, on the back of my neck. I won't flinch. Take your best shot. Decapitate me if you think you're hard enough, if you can even lift my axe, and in a year's and a day's time, you will come to the Green Chapel in the far desolate north, and you and I will land a similar blow on your neck. How's about it? Which one of you brave knights will rise to the challenge? Well, suffice to say, a silence fell on the assorted knights of the Round Table. What happened last time this happened to you? Last time a primordial green being swept into the decorum of your life and demanded such a challenge. What did you do? I know what I did. I didn't accept the offer. Too strange. The dice seem rigged. No. There's some occult magic spell at play here. This will not end well. But that silence had gone on rather too long and had become rather uncomfortable. And then there was a sound, a terrible sound. It was laughter coming from that Green Knight. Derisive laughter. Would no one stand up to the challenge? Finally, looking around at his knights, King Arthur got to stand up himself, but he was beaten to it by his nephew, the youngest and brightest of all the knights, Sir Gawain himself. He stood up and said, I will take up the challenge. King Arthur looked at his nephew. There was just a little flicker in his eyes, and he nodded and sat back down. Queen Guinevere sighed relief. Gawain walked up to the knight, who stood proud and seemed to eye him up and down, and gave him a little nod of respect. This young knight clearly wanted to show his mettle. Gawain took the great green archaic battle axe, weighed it in his hand a little, and that Green Knight bent low, his stature. Even bending down, he was almost as tall as Gawain was, and he parted the green dreadlocks at the back of his head, took off his helmet, and exposed the bare neck just above his armour. Gawain took a swing and boom, chopped that Green Knight's head clean off. A huge head it was, and it went dunk, 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 dunk on the flagstone floor of King Arthur's court, spewing blood everywhere. And that was it. Easy enough, a little too easy. And as those knights looked around at one another, slowly, like some ancient rumble of thunder, there was a laugh, and it got louder and louder and louder. It was coming from the severed head of the Green Knight, and his green, vast fingers began to quest around on the flagstone floors until he found the great head and lifted it up. And those eyes blazed, not black now, but red like fire. And he went, ha, 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 ha. I will see you in a year and a day, brave Gawain, Knight of the Goddess. I will see you there at my Green Chapel. Do not be late, and do not break your oath. And he tucked his head under his arm, got right back on his horse, took up his axe, and rode out through that dark doorway into the night, into the very embrace of nature itself. And the ivy went back through the door and left the assorted knights of the Round Table with a bit of a tale to tell. Winter passed into spring, which gave way into glorious, glorious summer, the finest summer in Britain that had been seen or remembered for many a year. And Gawain, although he had a great task ahead of him, he drank the nectar of that summer, and every courtesy that he gave to any other knight or maiden of King Arthur's court was bestowed tenfold on him, because all the other knights knew that in truth he was going to his death. But just like someone that's given a diagnosis of cancer, instead of walking around like a condemned man, he drank in every moment. He loved that summer. Think about Gawain, right? In the old stories, far older than this one, he's called Gwelachmai. I said that before. He's the hawk of May, and he's some people say he's descended from Lu, the Irish god of the sun. And in some old stories, Gawain's strength, it gets stronger and stronger and stronger as we move towards the summer solstice or towards high noon, and then gets weaker again as we head into winter, almost like an old solar deity. There's many, many ancient, pre-Christian, ancient solar deities from this part of the world. Gawain's sort of got that standing behind him. So in summer, as we walked into the realm of the oak and the high summer, Gawain was at his peak strength. But then summer slowly wilted and turned to autumn. And as we moved towards Samhain, towards Halloween, anxiety began to rise in Gawain as he knew his time for his embarking on his quest was drawing near. So, after the Samhain, the Halloween celebrations, All Hallows Eve, Gawain gets ready to set off, and he's been given many gifts, new shining armour, very well polished, just like any Grail Knight from any of the tales. He sets out from Camelot, which most people place down in the West Country in Cornwall, or not far from me here in Somerset, Glastonbury Tor kind of area. He sets off through the verdant green hills towards the far north, always trying to inquire wherever he goes the location of the Green Chapel. But whoever he asks, no one seems to know just quite where it is, or maybe they just give some sort of clue that way. He works his long way over the mountains of South Wales, up into the wintry land of Snowdonia, the peaks of North Wales, and winter is closing in. He works his way past frozen waterfalls, which he sleeps under in Wales. He makes his way for a time to Mona, or Anglesey, the ancient outpost of the Druids, but he finds nothing there, but people are pointing further north. Further north always comes. Winter is really closing in now. The nights are lengthening and lengthening, and winter's icy grip has its talons in all of the land. The snows are coming down, and Gawain sometimes sleeps under hedgerows, sometimes beside smoky fires if some kind old villager will let him in. It's always important to be hospitable to strangers in case they're a wandering god in disguise, which Gawain quite possibly is. He's working his way on, and it's Christmas Eve now, and he's somewhere in northwest England, somewhere in the Pennines mountains, snow-clad mountains all around him, and he, in his weakest moment at midnight on Christmas Eve, prays to the Virgin Mary. Gawain, sometimes called Knight of the Goddess, Knight of the Sacred Feminine, prays to the Virgin, Mother and Child, to reveal some refuge for him. At daybreak the next day, on Christmas Day, he rises over a peak on a mountain, and there, like some miracle, some oasis, there's a grand and beautiful castle with orchards all covered in snow, and great walls and smoke rising from its turrets. Outside its gates, he meets a great bear of a man, huge, bearded, strapping man, and he declares that he is the knight of this castle, and his name is Bertilak, and he will invite Gawain in. Now, once inside the castle, Gawain found Bertilak to be a most convivial host. And Bertilak, of course, asked Gawain, what is the nature of your quest? Because Grail Knights, they're always on a bloody quest, aren't they? And Gawain tells him he's coming to fulfill his vow to face the Green Knight at the Green Chapel. Do you know where it is? And Bertilak said, my friend, God is smiling on you, because the Green Chapel, strange, desolate place it is, but it is only half a day's march from my castle. Why don't you stay here for the next few days, spend Christmas with me, and then you can ride off on New Year's Day morning, and you will be very much on time to fulfill your oath to this Green Knight you speak of. Well, Gawain spent a long time sleeping in ditches and under hedgerows, and this sounds like a very good deal to him, so he agrees. Gawain found his host very, very convivial, and they would spend the afternoon and evening and Christmas Day feasting together, drinking some of the finest mead and good red ale and the finest venison roasted over an open fire. And hosting Gawain along with Bertilak was Bertilak's very, very, very fair wife. Let's just say Bertilak was definitely punching above his weight. She was radiant and beautiful with this red gold hair and fair skin, and was just very, 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 very alluring and very kind to Gawain, and would, often put her hand on his... there was only one other in the castle that Gawain knew of, apart from servants scuttling in the shadows. It was an old woman, an old crone that often seemed to follow Bertilak's wife around and skulking in the shadows. And Gawain didn't really know who she was, but she was a bit weird. But Bertilak and his wife's company was very, very, very good. And after Bertilak's wife would retire to her chambers, Bertilak and her host would stay up drinking by the fire. And then, in the height of amusement, they hit upon a very fun game that they would play, a sort of bet, if you like, a sportly arrangement between two gentlemen. Bertilak said he was going to go out hunting for the next few days between Christmas and New Year, but Gawain, of course, should recuperate and rest inside the castle. However, as a gift to his esteemed host, he had never hosted one of the Knights of the Round Table before, Bertilak was going to gift any quarry, any game he had found hunting to Gawain as a present to take back to the Knights of the Round Table. It would be my honour, said Bertilak. But in return, Gawain has to give Bertilak any gift or game or quarry he was to find whilst recuperating inside the comfort of Bertilak's castle. And the men laughed and laughed at the absurdity of this arrangement, but they agreed and chink, cheers their glasses or their tankards of mead or whatever. And Gawain, just still giggling at the incongruity of this, and his heart warmed by the generosity of his host, retired to his bedchamber at the top of the castle in one of those nice four-poster beds, Game of Thrones style, with a fire burning in the stone fireplace. At dawn, Gawain was wakened by the shouts of men and the stampede of horses and the barking of hounds and the sounding of trumpets and a great ruckus as Bertilak and all his men and all the dogs rode off on their hunt. And in that quiet half light of the morning, somewhere between sleepiness and wakefulness and dream, Gawain was aware of a figure sat at the end of his bed inside the curtain. And then a delicious scent filled his nose. He recognized it and the figure. It was his hostess, the wife of Bertilak. And she was wearing very little. And she crawled up from the foot of the bed and just unbuttoned herself a little bit and presented herself to Gawain, very much wanting to do the love-making. Gawain, of course, being a Knight of the Round Table, protested. I People sometimes find this story, a bit twee. Oh no, no, please, I cannot possibly. You must understand here, he's not just being a prude. This is his whole chivalric ideal. The whole ideal, you cannot betray the hospitality of your host. That would be to kick scorn in the face of everything that Gawain stood for. It would make his whole life's endeavour as a knight of the Round Table meaningless. And if he was going to face his death tomorrow, he didn't want his life to be meaningless. That's why Gawain protested against this very, very attractive woman's embraces. And this woman, I have to say, had been stalking. He had been having the sexy dreams about this woman, and he really would have liked to give her a thorough nobbing if he was not bound by his knightly vows. Young man in the prime of his life, remember, Gawain. And she was a looker. Anyway, the woman was quite offended and started to doubt that he was the Gawain, a friend of women that she had heard so many tales spoken of. And Gawain sadly said, yes, it is I, Gawain. And the woman left, a little bit saddened by this, but just managed to plant a little kiss, the most chaste of kisses, on Gawain's cheek before she left. Well, later on that day, Bertilak arrived with great celebration, and all the horses and carts were laden with quarry. You'd never seen so much venison. Just look at all the bloody dead deer that were laid out in rows in the great hall before the fire. And Bertilak said, well, here we go. That's several score in venison for you and your Knights of the Round Table to take back. Tell me, what have you got for me? And with that, Gawain stepped up to the great man's bristly cheek and just gave him a little peck on the cheek. And there was a pause, slightly awkward pause, and then Bertilak began to laugh heartily and said, I'm not going to ask where you got that. But he did sort of eye the doorway going to the kitchens, where some of the kitchen maids sort of scurried away. A deal's a deal. You didn't ask me, said Gawain, where I got my quarry. And the two men laughed together, and that night by the fire, many, many stories were shared, and jokes and laughter, and cups of mead were drank. The next morning, same thing again. Purr, purr. All the king's horses, all Bertilak's hunting party went riding off, and Gawain was left. And there, again, in the bed next to him this time, was his hostess, the wife of Bertilak. And she was wearing slightly less this time, just a little silky garment, and he could see the contours of her body, and she was pressing herself against him, and then even desperately this time, unbecomingly, you might say, trying to force her way onto him. You might say she was sort of straddling him and thrusting herself into his face and giving him a bit of all that. I don't know, use your imagination. And this time she managed to plant 2 kisses on Gawain's face, one on the cheek, one just on the corner of the mouth, before she slid away, really quite distraught and offended at Gawain's level of resistance to her feminine charms. So Bertilak arrives just before dusk today, and this time he's found not much venison, but a huge, great bristling boar. And it was me on him, he said, but just at the last minute, when he almost tusked me, I managed to stick my spear right into its flank. And this great beast, this boar, will provide much feasting for you and King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, good Sir Gawain. Now, tell me, what have you found? What quarry, what game do you have for me in return? And this time, Gawain gave him another little peck on the cheek and another one, just on the side of the lips there, and the two men laughed rather awkwardly. I won't ask, said Bertilak, I won't ask. And Gawain said, probably for the best. A little bit more awkward. But later on that evening, by the fire, all of this was forgotten, and the two men shared a good drink together, and good times were had. Cake was eaten, turkey and ham pie, all the stuff. Next morning, again, Bertilak and his retinue rode off to hunt, and the lady of the castle was... shall we just say, not going to take no for an answer. And Gawain had to use all his strength to resist her charms. Eventually, distraught, she just said, please take some token from me. How about this ring? And Gawain said, absolutely not. For the one part, I don't want your husband to see some ring that he's probably given you just twinkling away on my finger by the fire tonight. That might be a little bit awkward. But also a ring in this period, that implies the gift of someone's whole being, both physical, because it's a circle, and emotional, spiritual. It's the giving of someone's self away. And Gawain couldn't possibly accept that gift. Well, if you won't accept my love and my whole self, said the lady of the castle, please at least accept some token of my care. Tomorrow, you're going to go get your head chopped off by the Green Knight. Please take this green girdle. And she drew it from somewhere in her, from deep within the folds of her clothes. It was a green piece of silk, a feminine piece of green silk. This is an enchanted piece of silk, said the lady. Anyone who wears it can come to no harm. And she proffered it to Gawain, and before he could even utter protest, she delicately closed his fingers around it. And he nodded. She had found his one weak spot. It was some particle, not of weakness, not of carnal lust, but just that all too human desire for self-preservation, to live. She had found that. And he took it and she said, this is just between us, our little secret. And with that, she gave him 1, 2, 3 kisses, one right on the lips, and left. Well, after dusk, late and wet, Bertilak and his retinue trudged into the great hall, and he flung an old, smelly fox at Gawain's feet. The symbolism of this these two hunts is very, very rich. And Bertilak, looking a bit ashamed for himself, said, well, what have you got for me? Gawain gave Bertilak 1, 2, 3 kisses, that last one right on his bushy man lips. Stony silence. Is that all? Said Bertilak. Gawain lied. Yes, that's all. Then, that evening around the fire, conversation was strained for the first time between those two men, and Gawain retired early to bed. It was a big day tomorrow. The next day, Gawain set off and made his formal goodbyes to his host and lovely hostess, that strange old crone still standing in the shadows. Gawain half thought, had she been there in the bedroom the whole time too? Well, Gawain made his way to the green chapel. He had the green sash, the green girdle that was gifted to him by the hostess of the castle, hidden underneath his armour, tied around his upper thigh. Sure enough, half a day's ride later, he came to a great bowl in the land, and there was the green chapel. This was no Christian church. This was more like an ancient burial chamber with old dolmens, sarsen stones making an entrance. Strange, ancient place of worship. Almost seemed like a place of death rather than a place of life. Gawain approached. There was no one around, but he could hear a sound. It sounded like an axe being sharpened somewhere up on the hillside. Gawain dismounted and tied his horse to some desolate stump somewhere and approached the great dark doorway. And he announced his presence. He said, I'm Gawain, Knight of the Round Table, and I've come to fulfill my oath. And a voice from up on the mountainside somewhere said, wait there, I'll be down soon. It sounded like it was coming from a cave, and sure enough, out of that cave walked the vast figure of the Green Knight, holding his battle axe. And he walked down the screen, the slope, and he met Gawain, and he gestured inside to the Green Chapel. Well, Gawain took off his helmet and bowed his head to walk under that Sarsen monolith into a strange place. It was like this ancient dolmen had been converted into a Christian church, but ancient and strange it was, all covered over with moss and decay with dripping in. It was, as the poem Gawain and the Green Knight says, the most cursed kirk in Christendom. And right in the middle was some sort of, well, I would like to say altar, but to be honest, it looked more like a sacrificial stone, because that's kind of exactly what it was. And Gawain said, "Is this the place?" And the Green Knight said, "Yes. Are you ready to accept your blow?" And Gawain said, "I am." And he laid his neck down on that stone. And the Green Knight weighed the axe in his hand, took a great swing and brought it down on Gawain's neck, but he stopped. And Gawain, like any of us probably would do, just shrank away a bit in fear. And the Green Knight mocked Gawain and said, "Where is the notable bravery? The bravery of the Knights of the Round Table?" And Gawain protested and said, "I, unlike you, sir, have no witchcraft to protect me. I will not be picking up my head afterwards. Please forgive my moment of my small glimmer of fear. I will not flinch this time." And he stretched his neck out, and the knight swung it, and again he flinched away slightly. Okay, third time lucky. Gawain put his neck on the block, and the Green Knight swung it and swung it down, and Gawain closed his eyes, and he did not flinch, not one bit. And the Green Knight just stopped that axe, just making a slight little cut just in the back of Gawain's neck, and the blood dripped down, drop, 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 3 drops on that altar stone. "Is that it?" said Gawain. The Green Knight said, "That's it, because 2 times, 3 times you resisted my wife's embraces, but you did keep something from me. You kept the secret of the green sash from me, but just to save your life. I think that's an admirable thing." And Gawain stood up, and the Green Knight took off his helmet, and his face seemed to shift and transform back into that of his host. Sure enough, of course, as I'm sure you figured out already, it was Bertilak, because he and the Green Knight were one and the same. And Gawain, he laughed and he laughed and he laughed. He had been initiated in some strange mystery. The meaning of it he did not fully comprehend. And had he failed or succeeded, he did not know. He did not truly know. He seemed dejected that he had lied to his host. But when he eventually arrived back to Camelot with all that quarry, that boar and all that venison and a tail and the green girdle, the knights surely treated him like it had been a great success, a huge roaring success, and many tales were told of Gawain and the Green Knight afterwards. Surely he had been on some strange initiation. So that, my friends, is the story of Gawain and the Green Knight. Now, in this story... This story is very much tangled up with the web of Arthurian romance, which is very multifaceted and a real Gordian knot. In the telling of this story, that old crone is actually Morgana Le Fay in disguise, and it's all been a ruse to sort of test the Knights of the Round Table. I would say that's probably a later medieval insertion in this story, but interestingly, this very pagan figure of the triple goddess, the crone and the mother and the virgin, does seem to be coming in there. There's a bit of the Lady Kundry, the ancient divine feminine aspect, and Gawain, as I've said before, is often referred to as the knight of the goddess, the knight of the sacred feminine, this feminine masculine interchange, which is very common in pre-Christian paganism and contemporary paganism. If you want to read more about that, there's an excellent book called The Night of the Goddess by someone Matthews. Brilliant book. But yeah, many pagan elements in this story. Not least among them, the Green Knight himself. Obviously, you'll recognise elements of the Green Man in this. I've talked about this on this channel before. This medieval idea, you often see it carved in church doorways in Britain, representing lots of things, but the power of nature, the divine in nature. So this is a pre-Christian idea, but also adopted by Christians. You know, I don't think it was just an act of revolt by those stonemasons feverishly carving these green men. They must have incorporated this older mythic being into the Christian ethos. But it's older as well. It's also death, you know, death and rebirth, and the sort of immutability of it and of the cosmos itself, the void, the fact that we're all going to die. In this context, Gawain, the hawk of May, is almost like an old solar deity, a hawk often symbolic of the sun, like the Egyptian god Horus. Many other sort of solar deities have a hawk or an eagle as their symbol. All of them, as far as I know. So Gawain, probably an ancient solar deity, repurposed into more of this sort of shape-shifting warrior poet, you know, this sort of animal prophecy. His power animal is the hawk. It's not just a Native American thing, power animals. It's got its reflection in Celtic mythos as well. Incidentally, Arthur, his name means the Great Bear. It's very much the influence of the character Bjorn, I think he's called in J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit, this sort of shape-shifting bear man that is sort of is very much like Arthur. So yes, Gawain going on a sort of initiation, almost like the sun rising and dying and being reborn in the new year. It's very much got this regenerative, ritual, cyclic quality to it, this tale, and the initiation of death. And that journey, almost like an underworld journey, and facing the fear of death and being initiated into the mysteries of death. It's almost like going on a wilderness vigil, this myth. So a lot of different elements there, and loads of reflections in earlier Welsh and Irish folklore. Too many to mention here, but loads of them. But yeah, I find this figure of the Green Knight absolutely fascinating. This green man, this death man. We also see it reflected in the wild man of European folklore as well. Almost like a figure of initiation. So it's very much an initiation myth, this one, and full of deep mystery. And I don't want to extrapolate too much, because you can reduce things down too much if you go X equals Y, I find. But this is, an initiation myth for our times. Thank you very much.